Welcome to the On the Pen podcast with your host, Dave Knapp.
Welcome to this Tuesday, August 5th edition of On the Pen, the Weekly Dose podcast. I am your host, Dave Knapp, man on the Mounjaro. That's why I'm here. You, my friend, are on the pen. That's why you're here. Wegovy, Saxenda, Victoza, Trulicity, Mounjaro, Zepbound, Compound. That pen is what we talk about each and every week here. So as you're jumping in, hit the thumbs up button. Let the algorithm know that you are a fan of the work that we do here. And if you're listening on the podcast, give it a 5-star rating and review. That really helps to push what we're doing out there. And if you are not, subscribe to our newsletter. That is where you get all the updates. We're going to be doing a personal update this week on my own journey. It's been a long time since I've done that. And if you want to catch that, you have to sign up for our email alerts. So you're going to go to Obesity News. Just type that into your browser. It's a little spot for you to put your email in. Pump your email in there. You will not be disappointed. If you are somebody who enjoys our Substack, put Substack in the comments. I know that many of you are, but there are some really, really interesting topics to get into today, and I'm looking forward to doing it with all of you. Thank you for giving me this platform to share with you each and every week. This is a live edition of the Weekly Dose podcast. Sometimes we record it, sometimes we do it live, and this week we are doing it live. So I want to welcome Chasing Sunshine, Jazzy, Melissa, TB Healthy, Sue the Dude's in the house. Welcome, buddy. Shelly is in the house on the jab. Karen's in the house as well. Thank you for being here. So for over the last, I'd say 2 years, drug makers like Eli Lilly and Novo Nordisk and their PR machines have really tried to conflate two very different things. On one side, you have legally compounded GLP-1 medications where they're either coming from 503A or 503B pharmacies. 503As actually have oversight by their state pharmacy boards. 503Bs actually have some federal oversight from the FDA via the current goods and manufacturing process. We have covered that so very thoroughly at On the Pen. And so we have seen this coming, and we've been warning since about the time I started making content in GLP-1 that this would likely be the big pharmaceutical companies' way of getting sort of blurring the lines, right? And so what they have done is exactly that. They blurred the lines between research grade, not for human consumption peptides and legally compounded peptides from 503A or 503B pharmacies. And up until now, we really haven't had the FDA jump in and make a distinction for people, right? And it's really important to understand the distinction because, like I said, 503As, 503Bs, they have this oversight where you have these other research grade chemicals, not for human consumption. They're labeled that way. They're knockoffs that are often sold in the comments of the videos that we put up. You'll see these people, hey, they want to sort of lure you off to different social media platforms where they can have like an encrypted chat and do things like that. And these medications are often mislabeled. Sometimes they're dangerous, and they're always 100% of the time they are unregulated. And so people are getting these medications through these channels outside of their doctor supervision, oftentimes, which can really lead to people not getting the care that they need when we're talking about treating the chronic disease of obesity. And until now, the messaging out of the FDA sort of allowed these two different types of medications to become conflated with one another. And the silence was deafening because ultimately the big pharmaceutical companies were able to get out the messaging they wanted, and it was outside of channels like this were largely going uncontested until this past week. The FDA finally did something that matters, and I think is helpful to help people draw that clear distinction between them. So in the FDA's newest communication, which is linked at obesity.news, It's not perfect, but it does something that the drug makers never wanted you to know. It makes the public distinction between these legally compounded GLP-1s filled at state licensed pharmacies or CGMP regulated outsourcing facilities and not for human consumption research chemicals and counterfeit products. Now, this always sparks a good deal of debate because once the compounded medications became harder to find after the shortages ended, many people were pushed to these research grade versions, and so it sparks this big debate. And anytime I say anything that remotely can be construed as negative about them, people go crazy. But at the end of the day, I want you to understand that what we are for is access to care for obesity, because obesity is a chronic relapsing disease that deserves care, and it deserves treatment by highly trained and highly qualified professionals who have your best interest at mind. And unregulated, untested research grade chemicals are just nothing you're ever going to catch me promoting on this channel. And that's why I think it's important to make the distinction between what these are. You do what you're going to do to maintain access, and I don't fault anyone for doing that. But at the same time, making this distinction between the research grade versions of these medications and the branded medications is something that it was long overdue from the FDA. So the FDA made this clear distinction, and it perhaps, I think what's most interesting is potentially signaling how they plan to handle compounding in the future. One of the things that we've been reporting is that the 503B pharmacies, the outsourcing facilities, by all accounts within the industry, have begun to ramp up their own production of GLP-1 medications again, even though the shortage is over. There must be some sort of legal loophole. Of course, I've speculated as to maybe they feel like they have some cover from the administration, perhaps using compounding as a lever to get these drug companies to comply with most favored nations pricing. All of that stuff, which we've gone over extensively on the platform, the newsletter, obesity.news. But here's the key takeaways from the FDA's new guidance, which I think are important to understand. That compounded semaglutide and compounded tirzepatide, those are going to be the active pharmaceutical ingredients in your branded medications like Wegovy and Zepbound, are allowed under federal law. So there's no ban on compounding right now when the brand names are not commercially available, or to take it a step further, when the branded versions don't fulfill a patient's need, right? And research grade semaglutide and tirzepatide sold online are illegal, being sold illegally and dangerous, and in some cases falsely labeled with names of legitimate pharmacies. It also goes on to say that salt forms of semaglutide, including semaglutide sodium and semaglutide acetate, are not the same ingredient as the FDA approved drugs, and there's no lawful basis for compounding them. Now, interestingly, that may sound like a lot of chemistry speak to you, but the important thing to know is that semaglutide in its approved form, made by Novo Nordisk, an FDA approved form, is actually made in a process that involves yeast. So there's almost like a brew made, like just think of GLP-1 beer. Just give it time, it'll hit the market. GLP-1 beer, where basically they take the protein of semaglutide and they're able to then sort of extract the protein from this yeasty brew and then make the pharmacological drug out of this yeast base. I believe the process is called recombinant process. And so basically what it's saying is it's delineating between chemically synthesized versions of semaglutide, which is what you're getting when you get research grade, and the yeast-based version that is made by Novo Nordisk. Does that make sense? And so essentially what you're seeing here is they're saying that the salt forms and the acetate versions of semaglutide have never been tested for safety. And while you may take them and get a similar effect, I think what the more important thing to understand about this and all research grade chemicals is that they are not synthesized the same way as the tested ones. And so we don't know what's happening long term. So while you may get the benefit metabolically, you maybe get the benefit from a weight loss perspective, and maybe even better lab markers, what we don't have is monitoring over the long term to see if that chemical process to synthesize these peptides is actually safe over the long term, and that you're not going to sprout a third head or a second third head. Third head for some of you, second head for others. So anyways, it goes on to say retatrutide and cagrilintide. So retatrutide being the triple agonist from Eli Lilly, cagrilintide being the amylin agonist from Novo Nordisk, cannot be legally compounded at all, which, yes, believe it or not, some compound pharmacies were compounding retatrutide and cagrilintide. The FDA was definitely made a strong stance, which Pharma will appreciate, that those cannot be compounded right now. And patients are advised to use only state licensed pharmacies and to report suspicious products to the FDA directly. Here's the most interesting part that I found. And again, this is linked at obesity.news in the article that I did here. So if you want to read the report for yourself, go to obesity.news, sign up for email alerts while you're there. But one of the most overlooked lines in this FDA update reveals something that I think the casual reader isn't going to notice. And it's that not all compounders are exempt from event reporting, safety reporting. So that's another thing that we've heard, even as recently as the Obesity Society did a congressional briefing a couple weeks ago. If you caught that podcast, this was an extremely disappointing presentation from the Obesity Society because it was completely disingenuous to compounds. One of the things that was brought up in that congressional briefing was essentially that compound pharmacies don't have to report adverse events. And while federal law does not require traditional 503A pharmacies to submit adverse events, 503B outsourcing facilities actually are required to report, and it's baked into the language of this FDA update. And so this idea that these medications are untraceable and unregulated simply does not pass muster, right? And so that's another piece of disinformation that I feel like was dispelled in what the FDA released. And so when Pharma paints compounding as this wild, wild west of untracked risk, they're actually hoping that you don't look into it closer, and they're hoping that you don't follow On the Pen and get good information about this stuff. They're hoping that you won't look closely at the difference between 503A and 503B pharmacies. But the FDA made this clear in their guidance, again, linked at obesity.news. So this wasn't just a safety bulletin by the FDA. It was a direct contradiction to a lot of the claims that had been made by Big Pharma over the last couple of years. And, I was going back into some content that we made very early on in content creation about GLP-1s, and we were talking about compounds. And I was warning people even 2 years ago, the pharmaceutical companies will eventually try to clamp down on this stuff. And when they do, they're going to try to conflate all this stuff as the same. And so all I'm trying to get out today is that there's a very clear distinction between 503A and 503B pharmacies, first of all, but there's another huge distinction between all compounded medications and research grade peptides not for human consumption. And so I just appreciate that the FDA actually gave us some useful and actionable information that people can make better decisions for themselves. Again, do what you think is best for you. If you don't have access to the medication, I think people should have the freedom and latitude to do as they please. But do know the differences. Do be informed. And for the love of God, please share with your doctor what medications you're injecting into your body so that they know what they can appropriately monitor for you. There are increased risks with taking research grade chemicals. And you want your doctor to be aware so that your doctor can monitor that and be very aware of what you're putting into your body so that like if there is something that you need to watch for, contaminants and what they could do for you long term, your doctor could be monitoring that for you. This is all I'm saying is just talk to your doctor and include your doctor into that conversation. So that is the update from the FDA this week. I hope that you will take that information and that it will just empower you to have better conversations with your medical providing team. So that you just get better care for the chronic disease of obesity. And it is a chronic and a relapsing disease. And on that topic, obesity has been treated, the symptoms of obesity have been treated with these GLP-1s, right? But what if we could get to the source of obesity? So when we talk about a disease, we're talking about a chronic relapsing disease that has its roots oftentimes in genetics. And we're standing right now at the precipice of a renaissance in obesity medicine. So if you think these GLP-1s are great, imagine if we could get at the source code of obesity and eradicate it from the beginning, right? And that's really the beauty of what Eli Lilly is doing with some of these investments that they're making. And I want to unpack that a little bit with you today. So for a long time, we as patients believed what we were told by our medical providers, by the people speaking into our lives. We were told that we did this to ourselves and that we carried that burden. Some of us still carry that burden, even though we're getting treatment and the treatment is working, which should be an indictment on the fact that you're treating a disease, the fact that you can add a medicine and actually get better. Some of us still do carry that burden. And we've tried every failed crash diet, every soul crushing weigh in on the scale. We've all, likely said a prayer to have the strength to start a new program, a new diet, a new fill in the blank, and that it would be different this time. And that is really the plight of somebody who has lived with the chronic relapsing disease of obesity. But the real shift and the real renaissance in obesity medicine started to happen when a handful of researchers and doctors who were treating patients with obesity had the audacity to look at patients as human beings. And really, a lot of this came out of the Obesity Society. And so while I knocked the Obesity Society earlier for their congressional briefing, it's important to understand that the only reason that we're having serious conversations about obesity today, and the only reason that we have access to the medicines that we do to treat it, are because of organizations like the Obesity Society. So while I think their congressional briefing and their stance on compounds is worthy of some criticism, it is important to also understand what they have done to advance the conversation and advance treatment of obesity as a disease. So kudos to our friends at the Obesity Society. They were the pioneers who first chose to stop blaming patients and to say, what if this wasn't about behavior? What if the problem was actually rooted in biology? And so along came bariatric surgery, along came GLP-1 medications. What is the next thing that's happening? And that really is the question that Eli Lilly has been trying to get to the bottom of for some time now. What they have started to get to the bottom of with GLP-1 therapies. But one of the amazing things that they have done over the past couple of years, since back in 2023, we covered this, they've acquired a couple of different companies that are really going to help them get to the root cause of treating obesity. And this is an exciting article that I am super excited to bring to you. But before I do that, before I bring you the rest of this, I want to just take a moment to thank our sponsors, Ro. You can check out Ro if you are looking to get treatment for the disease of obesity. Look no further than our partners at Ro, who are the ones that help us to do this each and every week, right? We are so thankful that they have given us the wonderful gift of sponsorship that allows us to do the amazing things that we're doing here, like visiting Washington, D.C., advocating for the Treat and Reduce Obesity Act to be passed, advocating for expanded access. So if you're looking for access to medication for the chronic disease of obesity, please check out Ro. Visit ro.co/OTP to learn more about what they do there, what they're doing with the Ro Body program, where patients lose 15 to 20% of their body weight in a year, coupled with lifestyle modifications and appropriately prescribed medicine. I love Ro. They love the obesity community, and they're doing some great research, some really interesting stuff going on with researching food noise that I'm going to be super excited to bring to you in the coming weeks. I'm super excited about all that. But check them out and let them know that OTP sent you. That you can get the Lilly vials directly from the Ro platform. You never have to leave it. You can get the GLP-1 medications from Novo Nordisk as well, right there. Whatever's appropriate in you and your doctor determine are appropriate for you. But check out the Ro Body program. Thanks to our friends at Ro. So what are these companies that Eli Lilly acquired, and how does that make a difference in the future of obesity medication? So they just partnered with a company called Gate Biosciences, which is focused on molecular gates. It's a new cellular technology that actually stops harmful proteins before they ever exit the cell. And if those proteins trigger inflammation or insulin resistant or weight gain, they may never make it out with this science that is being developed by Gate Biosciences. So in other words, they're able to stop the damage before it even starts. But that's just one piece of the puzzle because Lilly also acquired a company called Verve Therapeutics. Now, Verve is a leader in gene editing. This all can get a little bit scary, to be honest with you, when you start getting into gene editing. But when we're talking about a chronic disease like obesity, which is and does have its roots in genetics, it's important to understand this. So the work that Verve has done has actually focused around cardiovascular. Excuse me, I got a frog in my throat. Has focused on cardiovascular disease, right? And I think that's, where they're sort of the farthest along in their research is with these cardiovascular therapies. But while Eli Lilly hasn't come out and said that they plan to use this specifically with GLP-1 therapies or on top of what they're doing, it actually does suggest that they will involve these genetic, these gene editing therapies with the broader treatment of cardiometabolic disease, which is exciting. So in June of 2023, Lilly partnered with Verve to explore gene editing in cardiovascular targets. And these are genes that are tied to cholesterol and metabolism, which complements Eli Lilly's existing portfolio of metabolic drugs, including retatrutide, Tirzepatide, which are all helping people with obesity and type 2 diabetes. So while there's no direct confirmation that they're going to integrate this gene editing with GLP-1s, the alignment of these two things suggests that Lilly may be building towards a modal treatment using short-acting therapies like GLP-1s to treat people who are living with the disease of obesity currently, and then also potentially a one-time gene editing target to help people achieve durable metabolic control over a lifetime. And so you might say, like, well, how do you make that leap from Lilly acquiring a company for, cardiovascular diseases and obesity? Well, when you look at what the core competency of a company like Verve Therapeutics is, and you also couple that with understanding that Eli Lilly also partnered a couple of years ago with a couple AI companies. We covered this literally 2 years ago at On the Pen. They partnered with a company called Xtalpi, the letter X, TALPI. And this is a company that will allow Eli Lilly to advance potential treatments for obesity at a record pace. So they'll be able to run things through these AI platforms and target different genes and target different therapies and be able to check out how these medications and these potential treatments may work in the broader population. So they'll be able to cross-reference that with genetic data, with patient medical records, and all sorts of things that may allow the timeline for something like a gene editing therapy for obesity to be super, super fast-tracked. And so that was, it's interesting to go back and check the video out. It's embedded in my article at obesity.news. But just like positing about, how a partnership with an AI company could improve GLP-1 treatments. But what if we got to the root cause and got to really explore what it meant to get to the genetic part of obesity and be able to eradicate that disease? Like, you're carrying a gene for obesity, you're predisposed to it. What if they could get out ahead of that with a gene editing therapy? So this is really exciting when you think about the future of obesity medicine, because right now we're treating it. But what if we could get to the root cause? Because we know so much about obesity. Not getting to certain weight set points can dramatically improve your prognosis with the disease of obesity and treating it over the long term, because the higher you go, your body gets set at these different set points, and it starts to defend your weight when you try to lose weight. If you've ever tried to lose weight, especially the older you get, the longer you sit at your current weight, the harder it is to sort of break through that from a weight loss standpoint. So really, really interesting stuff coming out of Eli Lilly. And we're looking forward later this week to potentially hearing more about this as they have their earnings call on Thursday. So we've got earnings calls coming on both Wednesday from Novo Nordisk and then Thursday from Eli Lilly, which we'll be covering exclusively on our podcast over on YouTube. So if you're not following along on YouTube, now is a great time to hit the subscribe button to our YouTube channel. and make sure that you're constantly getting the videos that we put out. We will be letting you know when we drop these videos at obesity.news too. So type obesity.news into your browser and put your email in. You are not going to want to miss these updates. So we're hoping to hear more about the potential for gene editing and getting to the root cause of obesity from Eli Lilly this week. On the Novo Nordisk side, they'll be announcing, well, they've already announced, but they'll be introducing their new CEO who starts this week. So Novo Nordisk's new CEO starts this week, and we're going to be watching for a lot of things because a lot of people in the industry are really hypothesizing right now and speculating that we could see Novo Nordisk be very aggressive against compounders. So they, in my opinion, already have been. They've sued a lot of these, especially sadly, a lot of these mom and pop places that don't have the money to defend themselves. But there is speculation going on right now that they could drop a lawsuit even against Hims and Hers. And so that will be very interesting to watch. A lot of speculation going on about that right now. So we'll be listening closely to the Novo Nordisk earnings call on Wednesday and the Eli Lilly earnings call on Thursday. This past week, we also got some very exciting news out of the Trump administration. Now, this all bleeds into the conversation about compounds and PBMs and all of that. But earlier this year, the Trump administration had abandoned a plan that was put in place at the very end. It was basically a rule change that the Biden administration instituted at the 11th hour of their administration. So I believe it was December, which would have opened the door for Medicare to cover obesity medicines. Now, you may be like, I'm on an obesity medicine already under Medicare. Well, that's only because in the last few months, we've received indications for Tirzepatide and sleep apnea. We've received indications for Tirzepatide and heart failure with preserved ejection fraction. We've seen that with Wegovy as well. So there are other indications that you can get in, but if your indication is just straight obesity, Medicare doesn't cover it. And then you don't have the benefit of taking advantage of manufacturer savings card, because that's another rule that folks on Medicare can't take advantage of those plans. It's all rooted in the government's attempt to have people avoid being marketed to by pharmaceutical companies if they're on Medicare and Medicaid. So all of that leads to an environment which is very frustrating for those of you who are on Medicare, right? And so when the Trump administration announced that they were going to abandon that plan, it was a huge, huge disappointment to the entire community. Well, this past week, we learned, according to a document that was obtained by the Washington Post, that the Trump administration is actually preparing to launch a 5-year test program that would allow Medicare and Medicaid, specifically Medicare Part D programs, to voluntarily offer coverage for obesity medications like Zepbound and Wegovy. So that's huge because they've sort of revived this plan. Now, it's definitely restrictive. It's not going to be all plans. It's not going to be everybody who's going to have access to this, but it is a plan. Now, here's what I think is happening behind the scenes. What we've seen over the last couple of months, sort of in tandem with the Trump administration dropping that initial Biden plan, is the signing of the executive order called Most Favored Nations. And this is another thing that gets people riled up. Anything you're talking about politics gets people riled up. But we're talking about this only in terms of how this affects patients living with obesity, right? That's sort of the very narrow scope that we talk about politics here at On the Pen, because you can't talk about these things without being dipping your toes into the politics of it all. So if you want all the details about what's going on with the Trump administration's plan to add Medicare coverage for obesity and Medicaid coverage, some Medicaid plans already have it, but you can read more about the details about how that's all going to shake out at obesity.news. But in terms of what I think is actually happening here, is I think that the Trump administration is dangling a carrot right now, because I think what they did is they saw an opportunity to reinvent the Biden administration's plan. So some may argue, well, they just didn't want Biden to get credit for it. And that's always part of it. Politics is always part of it. But I think when you zoom out and you look at the Most Favored Nations plan to get these drug companies to reduce the cost of medications to what they're paying in other countries with similar economies, is they're simply holding a carrot over Eli Lilly and Novo Nordisk's head and saying, hey, listen, if you comply with Most Favored Nations and bring the cost of these medications down, we will add these medications to Medicare, right? So they saw sort of a lever to hold some leverage over the pharmaceutical companies, because opening Medicare and Medicaid would be a massive boon. I mean, literally overnight, you would see billions of dollars transferred from the Medicare and Medicaid coffers to the coffers of Eli Lilly and Novo Nordisk. That's not worth nothing. And so the Trump administration, sort of building on the Biden administration's plan, saw a way to use that as leverage to potentially bring down the cost of GLP-1 medications in the United States. Now, this is definitely my interpretation of this, but you're going to be hard pressed to find many people who are as engaged in everything that's going on in the world of GLP-1 and obesity medications like me, at least from the patient perspective. And so I talked to industry insiders all week long. I talked to executives with pharmaceutical companies. I talked to the compounding executives. I talked to everybody in this industry, and I think there's universal agreement that the Trump administration is moving towards bringing down the cost of these. And I believe that that's something that they're using as leverage. Now, this is not a political statement. This is just an analysis from somebody who is extremely plugged in to this industry. And so when I say that, I always feel like I end up having to defend myself in the comments. I'm not going to defend myself in the comments. Nobody works harder to understand everything that's going on in obesity medicine right now from the patient perspective. And I'm just giving you what I know from the industry. And so I'm hopeful that that's what's happening. It could happen. We'll see. We'll see. And we will continue to report on it here at On the Pen. That's why it's incredibly important that you hit the subscribe button and that you sign up for email alerts at obesity.news. So that's what's going on. Get the full article over on our Substack. Now, the last little bit of data that I want to share with you this week, which I think is pretty exciting data, is that Mounjaro just wrapped up a huge study, the Surpass Cardiovascular Outcomes study, which compared Mounjaro to Trulicity. Now, when we talk about Trulicity, we're talking about comparatively a much less effective GLP-1 medication. It was the first, Trulicity was the first weekly GLP-1 shot, but it was never even approved for obesity medicine because it just simply was not that potent, especially when you compare it to a drug like semaglutide, which came out at a similar time. But it was the first once weekly injectable. And so the cardiovascular outcomes, the Surpass cardiovascular outcomes, compared outcomes for patients on Trulicity and Mounjaro. Now, in a way, this is really positive because nobody got left behind in this study. Everybody got some form of treatment, right? The worst clinical trials for obesity and diabetes are the ones where, I should say obesity. The worst trials for obesity are the ones that get compared to placebo, because who wants to go a year or 2 years without getting treatment for their disease? And that's what you're looking at if you land a placebo in one of these trials. So this was unlike the select trials for Wegovy. This was comparing the Mounjaro molecule Tirzepatide to Trulicity, which is dulaglutide. So I just feel like that's important to know when we talk about the outcomes here. So it put Mounjaro's or Eli Lilly's Mounjaro up against Eli Lilly's Trulicity. And this is sort of compared also results from the Rewind study, which was a Trulicity study. So on the primary endpoint, major adverse cardiovascular events, including heart attack and stroke and cardiovascular death, Mounjaro was very superior to Trulicity, or the word they use is non-inferior, with an 8% lower rate of events. So major cardiovascular events. So here's where things hit home with the numbers from this trial. Mounjaro users had a 16% lower risk of dying from any cause. We call that all-cause mortality. They had a 16% lower risk of dying compared to those who were on Trulicity. Now, those on Trulicity also have a lower risk of dying from all-cause mortality. So Mounjaro builds on that by another 16%. So that was really exciting news to get in terms of Mounjaro's effectiveness over Trulicity, but a 16% reduction in all-cause mortality is huge, right? Over Trulicity. So how does this compare to the select trial for Wegovy? which is semaglutide, which gave us tremendous results in lowering all-cause mortality against placebo. So in late 2023, Novo Nordisk changed the game when it released the results from the SELECT trial showing that Wegovy could cut major cardiovascular events by 20% in people with obesity but without diabetes. So this is a non-diabetes study. The Surpass CVOT with Trulicity Mounjaro was a diabetic study. So the SELECT trial was in non-diabetics. And in non-diabetics, it reduced all-cause or major cardiovascular events by 20%. And so when comparing these two, know that you hear really encouraging numbers from the SELECT trials, but that was against placebo in non-diabetics, where this Mounjaro study that came out last week was actually in diabetics with Trulicity, not a placebo. Does that make sense? So just some important perspective to add to all the things that we're hearing about the Mounjaro study that came out. And a lot of people are saying Wegovy was better. It's hard to compare the data because these were not comparable trials. The interesting thing about this Tirzepatide trial, which I found interesting, is this was not a quick look. This was a 5-year double-blind randomized trial with over 13,000 participants from over 30 countries, all living with type 2 diabetes and established cardiovascular disease. And so the patients were given the maximum tolerated doses. That's another thing that was different in the SELECT trials. They didn't have to go all the way up in the SELECT trials because they wanted to keep people in the study. This one, sort of in line with other Eli Lilly trials, bumped everybody up to the highest dose. But it is the most robust data set we've ever seen for Tirzepatide. Prior to that was the pre-diabetes study, and that one was, I believe, 4 years. It was either 3 or 4 years. Don't quote me on that. And in that study, we saw that 94% of pre-diabetics who took Tirzepatide never became diabetic. Imagine that. Imagine just when we talk about coverage for obesity medicine, this is what the Congressional Budget Office, when they're trying to figure out how much it's going to cost to add Medicare, GLP-1s to Medicare for obesity, this is what they never consider. They never consider that, hey, if you're pre-diabetic and you take Mounjaro, you have a 94% chance of not developing type 2 diabetes based upon the data, right? The better stated is 94% of people in the trials didn't develop type 2 diabetes. Imagine how much avoiding patients getting diabetes saves the Medicare system. Listen, one of the things that we've said for a long time here at On the Pen is that GLP-1 medications are getting a bum rap because of the cost. Basically, people saying that, hey, these medications are going to bankrupt our healthcare system. No. Every piece of data that comes out about these medications seems to bolster the idea that these medications have the potential to save our healthcare system. Not only that, but we're getting direct cash pay prices. So these companies are working around the PBMs who have inflated the cost of our healthcare system by orders of magnitude. It's absolutely crazy. And hopefully we can get the cost down even more with some of the moves that the Trump administration is working. Hopefully they're successful. But Mounjaro didn't just maintain Trulicity's heart protection. It built on it. So it lowered A1C better. People dropped more weight. People preserve their kidney function better. It reduced all-cause mortality, and it improved biomarkers like blood pressure and lipids and so much more. And so really, really positive news. This has a major impact on all of our healthcare system. And I hope that we will continue to advocate as a community for the passing of the Treat and Reduce Obesity Act, which is something we just wrapped up a week in Washington, D.C. to advocate for. And thank you for helping us build this platform at On the Pen. Because of those of you who are paid subscribers over on YouTube and on Substack, we're able to generate revenue. And because of our partners like Roe, we're able to generate revenues that not only were we able to go to the Treat and Reduce Obesity Act, Your Weight Matters conference put on by the OAC and get up there on Capitol Hill again, but we were able to help pay for some other creators to go as well and to share their story with their representatives. So when you give back to OTP by becoming a paid subscriber, you can do that at obesity.news and sign up for $12.99 a month for our Substack. You're not only helping to build the first patient-centric obesity medicine news platform, you're helping us to advocate. Because this is a movement. And when we're all united as a community that has been so marginalized and so overlooked, but also a community who has been conditioned by way of the disease that we live with to work and work and work and work and white knuckle and white knuckle and white knuckle, and really with no promise of success at overcoming our disease because we've always been told it's our fault. We've been conditioned to work. And this community, contrary to what the world believes about us, this community knows how to work and put in the effort. And if we can do that, I truly believe that we can be successful at not only bringing down and increasing accessibility to GLP-1s, but ultimately to finding a day one day where the disease of obesity is a conversation of the past. What a beautiful idea and thought that is. If you are somebody living with obesity, if you've ever loved somebody living with obesity, before we go, would you hit the thumbs up button? Would you hit subscribe? Would you do all the things to help continue to grow what we're doing and to become a part of what we're doing? Those are just some very simple things you can do. If you're listening on the podcast, give us a 5-star rating and review. Those are all very free things that you can do if you don't have the extra $12.99 a month to donate to what we're doing here. It's very easy to hit the thumbs up button. It's very easy to share. It's very easy to save. So thank you for being here. Thank you for being the best part of what we do here at On the Pen. I'm so grateful that each and every one of you have helped to give me this platform where we can simply do better, not only for ourselves, but for the next generation behind us. Thank you for being here, and we'll catch you.